Hi, welcome to the History Talks. I'm your host, Will. This is Sebastian. In this episode, we continue our series on the communist revolutions of the 20th century, and we'll be discussing the rise of communism in China. So, Sebastian, how did the communists take power in China?
So let's start with how the Qing Dynasty is overthrown. And to do that, we're going to have to talk about a man called Sun Yat-Sen. Sun Yat-Sen is an episode all on his own, but basically his brother started a business in Hawaii and then moved Sun Yat-Sen to get an education there in Hawaii. Sun Yat-Sen became fascinated with Western government and decided that what China needed to fix the countless problems the Chinese country was facing was to reform the government into something more akin to that of the United States. And so after a whole bunch of stuff happens, he eventually, after a bunch of failed revolutions, he eventually starts a successful revolution, the Chinese Revolution. And this revolution overthrows the Qing Dynasty and establishes the Republic of China.
Okay, and you said he modeled this after the United States.
The United States is what inspired him to do this.
Okay, was he funded by the United States government?
He looked to the U.S. for funding, but none of the Western powers wanted to fund a revolution that was going to overthrow a government whose weakness actively benefited Western businesses.
I see, okay.
The Chinese government was so weak that countries started carving spheres of influence in China where they could basically just do whatever they wanted.
So when you say he was inspired by the United States system, he wanted to have a republic, he wanted to have, for example, an elected president. Is that something he was aiming for?
Yes,
okay.
And he also really wanted separation of powers and all this other stuff.
Okay.
Yeah. So,
but he did get his revolution, it sounds like.
Yeah, but basically he was able to take over southern China, but to get northern China, he had to agree to give the first term of the presidency to this general named Yuan. And this guy, he is one of the least savvy politicians in Chinese history. He starts trying to take power, but he gets really unpopular, and then he shows that he has no idea of the political situation among the Chinese populace when he tries to declare himself emperor, but then immediately gets overthrown because nobody likes him. So then Sun Yat-Sen comes back to power, he gets elected to the presidency, but now China...
Well, nobody likes him, but in order for him to have any kind of power at all, he must have had somebody backing him.
Yuan, originally,
was it a certain group? He was a general. Did he have the military officers backing him, but not the people?
Yeah, okay. And eventually, as he fell away from Republican ideals, the military became less and less loyal to him.
I see. So the idea of a republic was very popular at this time. And what decade are we talking about specifically?
So this is the beginning of the 1900s.
Okay, so the early 1900s. The idea of republicanism becomes very popular in China.
Yeah.
There's a revolutionary who's leading it. A lot of the people support it. The military officers support it.
Yeah.
Okay.
But the thing is, after Yuan is kicked out of office and soon becomes president again, China is already very unstable. While the cities really like this idea of a republic, not everybody's on board. Not to mention that with the collapse of the central government, a lot of the outlying regions of China are very unstable, leading to the Chinese Civil War. So basically, it starts with a bunch of regions in western and northern China falling to generals called warlords who create these states that are just military dictatorships under them for their own personal gain.
Okay.
And not all of the breakaway states are warlords.
So let's just go. So the monarch united all these factions, right? The monarch gets overthrown. Or the monarch had power over all these. Maybe they weren't all united, but the monarch had power over them. The monarch gets overthrown. Republic, they try to implement a republic, or at least they say that. So they're trying to do. But basically what it ends up being is a bunch of chieftains or warlords all fighting over their territory.
that's basically what happens in a lot of especially the more outlying regions of China. Sun is able to pull together the Chinese core of the Yellow River and the Yangtze River together under his new Republic of China.
Okay.
But he quickly starts having trouble taking control of China. Now remember that Sun was born like decades ago. Like he's been attempting revolutions over and over again.
Okay, so he started attempting revolutions in the late 1800s.
Yeah.
It wasn't until the early 1900s when he finally got somewhere with it.
Yeah.
Okay.
And all throughout, he's gained a more and more cynical attitude towards Western governments, because repeatedly Western governments would either, present empty promises or publicity stunts where they're like, oh, we support republics and democracy and freedom, but then they would offer no help to the Republic of China, and all this stuff that just made Sun done with the West.
Okay.
So eventually, so then other factions start to rise, including the Communist Party of China. Now, Sun's party is the Kuomintang, the Nationalist Party, but other parties start rising, including this CPC, led by a guy named...
Okay, so he's both nationalist and Republican. Or nationalist and supports a republic.
Yeah.
There is a communist party that's rising. Why are they rising? Is there a lot of poverty?
Yeah, there's some poverty, but there's also just
bad working conditions.
Bad working conditions and just general dissatisfaction with the fact that China is kind of in a civil war.
Okay, so people don't like the Civil War. They don't like what he's doing because they're seeing all these warlords fighting each other for control. Okay. Now, and they're looking for a strong central government that will straighten everything out, I'm assuming.
Because Sun in the early years was that kind of leader, but as he got older, he aged, and some people, he lost people, he just became increasingly more cynical, he just had a harder time controlling stuff outside of his core officers. And they were able to control a substantial amount of China, let's acknowledge that the entirety of central China and most of the East Coast was under Sun's control.
Okay.
But he didn't have Beijing.
I see. And
eventually, because of this Western cynicism and the increasing growth of Chen Duxiu's Chinese Communist Party, or technically this is the Communist Party of China, which is technically a separate entity, Sun actually starts looking to the USSR in the 20s.
Okay. In the
20s, nobody knows what's going on in the USSR, as we said in our previous episode. And with all this dissatisfaction with Western government and even sympathies towards at least a few socialist policies that at least sound good on paper to Sun, he's willing to negotiate with the USSR.
Okay. And
the USSR, at this point, this is still under Lenin's control, so he's just like, hey, can you work with the Communist Party? And Sun's like, all right, I'll work with these guys. And Chen Duxiu is the leader of the Chinese Communists at this time.
Okay, and how big is this party, or how powerful, how popular is the Communist Party in China at this time?
Not that popular.
Okay, so it's smaller, but it has Soviet backing. Yeah. Whereas before, when they were trying to do a more American or a more U.S. style government, they did not get backing.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this leads to the creation of an internal faction within the Kuomintang called the Left Kuomintang. The Communist Party and the Kuomintang form an alliance to try to reunite China. Now, not everyone is happy with this, namely Sun's second-in-command, Chiang Kai-shek, but some see it as necessary, and Sun is able to get the factions to play nice. then soon dies of old age. And this is where stuff starts to really happen. So Chiang Kai-shek has a successful campaign against one of the warlords, but Chiang Kai-shek is becoming very dictatorial, because Chiang Kai-shek is a general, and he has the backing of the military, but he's using that to become basically a military dictator, saying, oh, we just need this temporary military dictatorship, and then we'll start a republic.
Okay.
So, and also Chiang Kai-shek really does not like communists. He really hates them. So after this campaign against, I believe it's one of the southern warlords ends, he immediately him and Chen Duxiu start to get into conflict. And this leads to Chiang Kai-shek eventually kicking all of the communists out of the Kuomintang, and then all of them coming to this Communist Party of China and starting an insurrection, the beginnings of the Chinese Communist Revolution.
Okay.
And they have some battles in the streets. Eventually, they have
battles in the streets. Okay, so do they have a formal army, or is this just the kind of things we see like communist or anarcho-communists doing in America today, where just basically just
it's
just people just causing mischief in the streets?
There's some of that, but there's also a lot of partisans within the army who decided to turn against Chiang.
Oh, I see. Okay, so they have some military backing. It's not just hoodlums just causing trouble and harassing people.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's fighting in the streets, but eventually they get kicked out of the cities. So the communists try to regroup and strike from the countryside. One lieutenant proves to be partially successful. His name is Mao Zedong. He'll be important later.
Yeah.
But eventually, the front becomes overwhelmingly negative for the communists, and they are forced to retreat. But where are they supposed to retreat to? They're not going to be welcomed back into the Kuomintang, so they can't just disband, and none of the warlords are going to accept them either. So after some tough thinking, they end up coming to the decision to do the Great Long March.
Okay.
Now this...
What year are we in? Are we still in the 1920s at this point?
Yeah, this whole revolution was in 26.
26. Oh, okay. This is all happening in 1926. Okay.
Yeah. So eventually the Chinese Communist Party and the People's Liberation Army, as it's called, they do this Great Long March where they have to go through all the territory of all these warlords, go around the more powerful Republic of China, and find somewhere where they can set up a base of operations and prepare to strike back. And this Great Long March, it's very tough. Some historians estimate as much as 90% of the People's Liberation Army died in it, but it very much saved the Chinese communists because they basically had no other options. Any other option would just lead to annihilation. However, this Chen Duxiu guy, he dies during this Great Long March, and he has 3 other successors who all also die due to some of the horrible conditions that the Great Long March necessitates.
Okay.
And out of this vacuum of leadership, this one young lieutenant, just past his prime, or in his late 20s anyway, smart, extremely well-read, before he joined the communists, he was reading Locke and Montesquieu and stuff.
Okay, so he was studying philosophers of the Western Enlightenment.
Yeah, not just the West, but all sorts of philosophy. He was well-read. This lieutenant, who at the time was very young and known as very intellectual, was Mao Zedong.
Okay.
He becomes the chair of the Chinese Communist Party, and he is very successful.
And how does he become the chair? Is it because
all the other leaders died from the
everybody ahead of him died, essentially. He essentially rose to power by just being the only one to survive.
By being the only competent leader to survive.
Okay.
And eventually, they are able to take a mountainous city called Yan'an, and from there they're able to control the province of Shaanxi in northern China, and set up their base of operations. The Great Long March was successful, costly, but successful. So now their option is to pretty much just wait here. They have some stuff where they send diplomats to the Soviet Union and stuff, and they try to negotiate whatever, but after this decade-long march, they just need to rest. And then opportunity strikes after World War II.
We just jumped pretty far ahead. So this march started in 1926.
Yeah.
It takes 10 years. It ends in 1936.
Mm-hmm.
How much power do the communists have at the end of the march? Was this about attaining power or about simply surviving?
Simply surviving at this point. They were able to recruit some people along the march, but they also lost a lot of people.
Okay, so they were just able to... So they spent the next 10 years after 1926 just trying to get by, just trying to survive.
Yeah.
Then we're going ahead to the end of World War II, which is...
1945.
1945. Okay, so what happened between 1936 and 1945? They spent another 9 years just hiding out? Just trying to scrape by?
They were negotiating with the Soviet Union, and this is where the Republic of China really starts to fall, where Chiang Kai-shek's rules really starts to crumble.
Okay.
Because the Japanese, they during World War II, they invaded China. They invaded the Republic of China.
Okay.
Chiang Kai-shek was able to get a few of the warlords to say, hey, let's team up to resist the Japanese.
Right.
But ultimately, Chiang Kai-shek made some terrible military blunders, like abandoning his capital and trying to take out the Japanese army by flooding them, but almost all the casualties ending up being just Chinese civilians. So, and this ends up leading to the rape of Nanking, which is very gruesome, and and just general Japanese occupation in China. That is until, and this makes people really start to question the leadership of Chiang Kai-shek, which leads to a surge in recruitment for the Chinese Communist Party. More people are starting to head to Shaanxi. Some people within the Kuomintang are offering to become double agents. And the
Chinese government is demonstrating that, or it is showing itself to be incompetent.
Yeah.
Especially during World War II. The communists present themselves as an alternative.
Yeah. And their numbers swell.
Okay, so they grow. And this is during World War II or at the end?
During World War II.
During World War II, okay. So their numbers start to swell during World War II.
Yeah. Then the war ends. Japan is attacked on both sides, both by the Soviet Union, who occupy a lot of Japan's mainland holdings, and the U.S., who have taken out Japan's colonial empire and have dropped those two infamous bombs. And because the Soviets were able to occupy some of Japan's mainland territories, they are able to negotiate getting those territories in the peace deal. So this is how they found the North Korea. The Soviets create North Korea, and the Soviets give the province of Manchuria to the Chinese Communist Party, including the city of Beijing.
Ah, okay, I see.
So now, with the...
okay, so the communists have been going around at this point for at least a couple of decades, just trying to get by. But during World War II, they are able to grow in numbers. They are able to gain some power because the current administration is failing at its job to keep the country together. It's failing at its job to defend China from the Japanese. Then, at the end of World War II, because the communists won in that part of the world, the Soviets, I should say, won. They are naturally going to be aligned with the communists of China, and they increase the Chinese communist power by
they give them
a significant amount of land. It's not only a significant amount of land, but a very important portion of China.
Yeah.
Okay, so now what are we in? We're in 1945.
Yeah.
Right? The Chinese communists now have power.
Yeah. So
are they led by Zedong?
Yeah, Mao Zedong.
Mao Zedong. Okay. So Zedong was there from the start.
Mm-hmm.
He was involved in the Long March.
Yeah.
He survived throughout all this. Survived where all sorts of people ahead of him died. Is he still the leader of the Chinese Communist Party?
Yeah.
Okay. So now all of a sudden he has risen and gained all kinds of power. So what does he do, and what do the communists do with this?
Well, he spends a couple years consolidating his control over the newly gained territories, and then the war starts. The war between the Chinese communists and the Kuomintang restarts.
Restarts. Okay. Kuomintang. He's been. How long has he been? How long has he had power?
Chiang Kai-shek. He's been in power since like 19 something.
Oh, and now we're in the late 1940s. So.
Yeah.
Okay. And do you think is that a good stopping point where we do another episode? Is starting with that war?
I mean, it's a very.
Is that something very simple?
Let's just go right to the end of the war, because basically, Mao was able to consolidate control over some of the northern warlord states. He starts striking into Kuomintang territory. Chiang has a few victories, but then Mao is able to trick the U.S. into thinking the Kuomintang is losing, which causes them to force them to negotiate a truce. Mao rebuilds, and then the truce ends.
Wait, how does the U.S. government impact this? Do we have a presence in Korea at this time?
We have a presence in Korea, and we have a navy nearby. So we're like, oh, it looks like the Kuomintang might lose. So let's start a truce so that the Kuomintang can rebuild.
And which side was the U.S. military on at this time?
They were supporting the Kuomintang because they're closer ideologically to the U.S. and and Chiang Kai-shek really hates the Soviet Union. So
interesting. Okay, but this is right after World War II, and during World War II we fought on the same side as the Soviets. So all of a sudden there was some kind of shift that happened in the United States from going for fighting World War II aligned with the Soviets to all of a sudden immediately after World War II fighting against them. But that's something we could cover later. I'm thinking I think we've covered a good amount of
so we'll just
information for this episode.
So we'll just finish up with Mao rebuilds. He strikes further, and eventually they're able to conquer mainland China. The Kuomintang is forced to escape to Taiwan. Mao declares the formation of the People's Republic of China, and with control consolidated over all of China, basically, this is where Mao's reforms and reign really begins.
Wow, okay, so the late 1940s, that's when Mao and the Chinese communists truly take power.
Yeah.
All right, well, I think that's a good stopping point. We'll do at least one more episode on the rise of communism in China.
Yeah.
So thank you everybody for tuning in, and we will see you all in our next episode as we continue our series on the communist revolutions of the 20th. All right, good job, Bastion.
That went by fast. At this rate, we might end up needing to do 3 episodes on China, because